Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we'll be exploring Miracle at Dunkirk, the solitaire war game where you take charge of the Allied forces in France in 1940 and try to evacuate and rescue as many soldiers as you can in the face of the grinding German invasion. This game is designed by Herman Lutman and published by Legion Wargames. Let's jump right in and get started.
Let's do a big picture overview of Miracle at Dunkirk before we dig in and explore the contents. So Miracle at Dunkirk is a solitaire wargame playable only as the Allies. You'll be fighting off German attacks, organizing your retreats, and frantically trying to get troops loaded into ships and on their way back across the English Channel. Now this is a meaty game. A full playthrough comes in at 4+ hours, so probably something you'd split over a night of 2 of gameplay. Each turn in the game represents 1 day, and the game lasts 8 days of historical time. The scale of units varies, with Allied units representing brigades and German units representing divisions. Let's walk through some of the major features of Miracle at Dunkirk. The map is probably a good place to start. So this is a dual-featured map that structures gameplay. The map consists of areas, but these areas are linked by tracks that dictate the paths and movement of forces. Germans will advance from area to area along set tracks, pushing back the Allied forces and tightening the noose on Dunkirk. The heart of gameplay, though, is the turn order activation deck, which structures each of the 8 turns in the game. Now, we'll look at this deck in more detail in a bit, but basically at the beginning of each turn, you'll shuffle the turn order deck. Then you work through this deck by drawing a card and doing the action or mini process that the card dictates. There are 6 different types of activation cards, each of which points to a different mini process. Let's walk through these types of activations now as they highlight the key aspects of gameplay. So you could draw an event card from the deck, at which point you'll then draw an event card from the event deck and follow the actions listed there. This event deck is rather large, which makes me think this game will have a lot of variety each time you play. A second type of turn order activation is the Wehrmacht activation, at which point you'll work through a mini process to move and attack with German ground units. Similar to this are the British ground operation cards, which allow you to move and fight with some of your ground forces depending on which corps has been activated. Air operations come into play when a Luftwaffe attacks card is drawn. This leads to a mini process that could see RAF support come into play and see your troops and units get attacked by the relentless Luftwaffe. Naval operation cards allow the British player to move and conduct operations with the range of ships at your disposal. And during this phase, you can also trigger German artillery attacks and run into or clear mines. U-boat attacks and E-attacks also play a role in the game. The last type of activation card you can draw is an evacuation operations card. This triggers a mini process that focuses on getting your soldiers and survivors back on ships to England. Altogether, these 6 different types of actions are the building blocks of a turn. When the turn order activation deck has been completely gone through, you proceed to an end of turn phase and then cycle back to the next turn. Now there are some other key elements of gameplay. Combat uses a dice chucking system to determine successes and failures. Day and night is modeled, but in a semi-abstract way based on how many naval operations and evacuation operation cards have been drawn in a particular turn. German forces have a reinforcement stage to further compound your problems as the Allies, and as the British, you have a ship repair function to bring back into play some of your damaged naval assets. Victory is based on victory points, which are largely based on the number of forces successfully evacuated and whether you've lost or held some key cities by the game's end. The rulebook is 28 pages long, and there is a good bit of text here. Now, when I first saw this, it gave me a bit of pause, as I wasn't expecting so many rules. But once you start to look through the rules, you realize that, well, the volume of rules is large, the complexity is really not that high. Rules are largely carved up by types of activations, so we've got sections for naval operations, evacuation operations, and ground operations, etc. Each of these sections isn't complex, but the sum of them mean that there is a fair amount of stuff to get comfortable with. The good part of this is that I think this will be a game where you can learn and play as you go. I'd recommend probably just setting up the game, pulling a turn order card, and then working your way through that particular section of the rules. Lather, rinse, repeat, and I imagine you'll be moving through the gameplay pretty efficiently. The layout now is pretty clean here, and the rule sections that I've read seem pretty straightforward. There are also a good number of text examples, Now, graphics support here is rather light, to be honest. I'd reserve judgment on the rules on the whole until I start to learn and play, but I do wonder if some more graphics would help speed up the learning. On the whole, though, I don't think this is a complex game. The back of the box lists the game as medium complexity, and I'd agree with that. I'd put it at a 4 out of 10 on the complexity scale at an estimate. Solitaire-wise, this of course is a 10 out of 10, as it's a fully designed game for solo play. Scenario-wise, the game is the game. There aren't scenarios to select from, and there's no optional rules really to add to gameplay. I do think, however, that given the nature of the events in the game and the systems, naval, ground, evacuation that you have to coordinate, that this will be a game where you can revisit numerous times as you try different strategies and approaches to improve your play and your ultimate score in the game. Let's take a look at the counters in the game. There are 208 double-sided counters. The unit counters that we can see over here on the left and right edges are 3/4 of an inch, while the gameplay markers in these compartments here are 6/10 of an inch. Now I've punched and clipped the counters here and then sorted them, as well as all the cards in the game, into these cube for me trays. There's a link to this tray kit and the card kit in the video description. The British units in the game are largely brigades, and there are 2 counters for most units. So we can see a darker and a lighter counter that represents the depleted side for the battle-worn side, if you would, for these counters in the top left compartment here. Additionally, the back side of the counter, where we see these stripes, shows the unit's reduced strength and step loss side. So essentially, British units can be in one of 4 different combat states. Now, the counters themselves are rather straightforward, basically consisting of 3 numbers. The top left is the unit's cohesion rating, the bottom left is the combat factor, and the bottom right is the defense number. There are also unit identifiers and identifiers for motorized units. German units over here on the right are a bit different. They represent divisions. They don't have step losses. The backside instead represents their reorganized state. There are also counters for naval assets. We've got the ships, large and small, and then a number of French forces that played a role in the operation. Lastly, we have some markers for things like minefields, flooded marshes, and a large number of markers that you use to keep track of evacuees in the area. Then there's some entrenched markers as well. Let's walk through the player aids in the game. First up here, we have a terrain effects chart, single-sided, to help with the map reading and the map functions. And then on the right side here, we have the game setup guide, which walks you through the process to get all the units in the right place to start the game. This is also single-sided. Next, we have 2 3-panel single-sided play aids. Now, we mentioned that the game has a number of mini processes for each of the different activation cards, and these player aids, to a degree, correlate with those. There are segments for Luftwaffe attacks, ground attacks, naval operations. There's also a sequence of play guides here, and then miscellaneous tables for things like E-boat and U-boat attacks and German reinforcements. Lastly, we have a single-sided gameplay tracker, which tracks things like game turns, evacuation activations, aircraft and air operation activities, and then victory points. All of these come on a thin yet functional cardstock. It looks like a very good, a very thorough and complete set of player aids to help and assist with gameplay. Miracle at Dunkirk has a hefty set of 117 cards to facilitate gameplay, divided up into 4 different types of cards. We talked earlier about the turn order deck, and these are some examples of the 17 cards in that deck. We can see here what cards trigger different types of activations, from Luftwaffe attacks to naval operations to Wehrmacht activation and French ground operations. Again, you play through this deck each turn until you've extinguished all the cards in the deck. The largest deck in the game is the event deck, which has 43 cards in it, and some of these events are positive, some of these events are negative. Now we can look here, for example, we've got this Channel Storm event, German Center Probe, which gives them an extra activation, offshore winds, and then rumors of an SS massacre here gives you a reroll of dice as the British, as your troops are infuriated. I really like the use of event decks in a game like this, especially one that has one main scenario for gameplay options, as these sort of event cards create narrative, they create depth, and they create a lot of variety in gameplay. Next, we have the channel attack cards, which you draw to determine the results of U-boat, E-boat, German artillery, and minefield incidents. Lastly, we have the German activation cards, where you're drawing to determine specifically what the German ground forces will do when they're activated, and then also to assist with the Luftwaffe activations. Let's not forget our dice. As we mentioned earlier in the video, combat is resolved with an element of dice chucking involved with it, so the game comes with 7 six-sided blue dice to help you facilitate all the combat in the game. Miracle at Dunkirk comes with this 22-inch by 25.5-inch paper map of Dunkirk and its surrounding regions. We can see here that the map is divided up into lots of areas, and additionally there are these tracks that will channel the German movement as they tighten the noose on the Allied forces down here by the coast. And then down along the coast here, we can see other zones used for evacuating forces to England. One of the challenges as the battle progresses for the Allies is how to balance withdrawal with defense. So leaving too few defenders at the front lines means the German advance will collapse the pocket, but having too many defenders means less troops rescued and a lower score to end the game. Now, geographically, the distance here between Dunkirk, which we can see down here, and Ypres, which is up here at the very edge of the map, is about 26 miles. So each of these zones looks to be roughly about 2 miles across, and the entire map represents an area about 40 miles or so in width. Stacking for the zones is very straightforward. For the Germans, it's 1 unit per zone. For the Allies, it's 2, with a few exceptions for things like the headquarters unit and then evacuees. I really like the look of this map. I mean, it's symbolically heavy, and yet at the same time, I think it retains a good sense of the geography and the coast and the region, and it looks like it's going to be very nice and functional for gameplay. So there we have it, an overview of Miracle at Dunkirk from Legion Wargames. I am very much looking forward to getting this one to the table. Now, Herman Luttmann has used these types of tracking channels in his other solitaire games, but what strikes me about this one is the scale. There are a lot of channels here, and the 4-hour plus game time gives this solitaire game a scale on the larger side of most solitaire games being developed today. It's nice to have a longer, meatier solitaire game to dig into, and certainly the events around Dunkirk have a highly dramatic and historical appeal. If you like this solitaire game overview, you might also like our overview of A Glorious Chance, which is a fully solitaire game from Legion Wargames covering the Battle of Lake Ontario in the War of 1812.